Now this first problem asks you to graph. Before you can determine the graph, you need to complete the XY chart. If you notice we have x squared and you remember the basic graphing shapes, you will remember this is a parabola, always. So we know right off the bat that A nor D would be the solutions here. Now one by one, take the x values, substitute into the equation. So I have y equals negative 3 squared minus 6. If you put this in a calculator, handy hint, be sure to use parentheses around those negative numbers to get the correct sign, because this is really a 9 minus 6, which is equal to 3. Easy to get the wrong answer on the calculator if you don't use the parentheses. Quickly plugging in the rest of the numbers, if I have negative 2 squared minus 6, that's 4 minus 6, which is negative 2. If I substitute in negative 1 squared is 1, 1 minus 6 is negative 5. 0 squared is 0, minus 6 is negative 6. 1 squared is 1, minus 6 is negative 5. Positive 2 squared is 4, minus 6 is negative 2. Positive 3 squared is 9, minus 6 is positive 3. Now, we must find the parabola that matches up to these ordered pairs. So check them. The first ordered pair I noticed would be easy to check is 0, negative 6. In answer choice B, I do have 0, negative 6 on that parabola. However, in answer choice C, 0, negative 6 is not a point on the graph. So my correct answer, in this graph, we notice that we have absolute value, and absolute value is always the shape of a V. Also, the negative in front of any major term when graphing will invert or flip upside down the graph. So that means this negative tells us that the V shape would open downward. So right off the bat, we can eliminate a couple of the answer choices. Now, let's complete the substitution. If I take the negative 3, substitute it into the original equation, absolute value of negative 3 is 3, but that negative comes down in every answer. So if I plug these numbers in one by one, I will end up with negative 2, negative 1, 0, because it cannot be negative, negative 1 again, negative 2 again, and negative 3 again. Now, let's go ahead and check these answers and see which one of these V shapes would be the correct one. Now, if you check the 0 point again, 0, 0 is obviously on both of the V shapes. You may actually need to use the magnifying glass to see more closely what is going on. Let's see, they're counting by 2, so it looks like this is 2, negative 2, and that would be 4. 4 goes down here to negative 6. That's just not matching up. These are kind of close together, but I'd have 1, 1, 2, 2, 3, 1, negative 1, 2, negative 2, 3, negative 3. Looks like answer choice C is the one that matches up. Now this question has us to graph x to the third. X to the third is the shape of what I call the S-curve. It will be a curve on the graph that has a twist or like an S in the center. Now we must substitute these numbers in one by one into the original problem to see what we get. So let's substitute in the negative 3 cubed plus 7, which would be negative 27 plus 7, or negative 20. You will do this with each value. So negative 2 cubed is negative 8, plus 7 is negative 1. Negative 1 cubed is negative 1, plus 7 is 6. 0 cubed is 0, plus 7 is 7. 1 cubed is 1, plus 7 would be 8. 2 cubed is 8. 8 plus 7 would be 15. 3 cubed would be 27, plus 7 is 34. Now let's go ahead and determine which graph is the correct one. Go ahead and check out the 0 point first because it's easy to check. So let's look for 0, positive 7. So 0, 7 would be about right here. That is not a point on the graph, so A would not be our answer. 0, 7 is on graph B. 0, 7 would not be on graph C. And 0, 7 is on graph D. So I have it narrowed down to 2. Now let's go ahead next and check this extreme number down here, 3 and then 34. If I go over here to choice D and I go 1, 2, 3 and go up 34, notice how that point is not on the curve, the graph. But if I check that on graph B, 1, 2, 3 and up 34, that point is there. So our correct answer is B. Now, this graphing problem may be a little bit easier. There are no numbers to substitute in and the graph is already given. It will be your job to determine the intercepts. The x-intercept would be the point at which this red line crosses the x-axis. So let's determine that point. 1, 2, 3, 4. That is at the point positive 4. Now you do not have to write that as an ordered pair because my math lab said to write it as an integer. Do the same thing with the y-axis. 1, 2, 3. This is at the value positive 3. So the y-intercept is 3. Now in this question you will simply solve. Start off with the distributive property. The distributive property says to take the number in front of any parentheses and multiply. So we end up with 4x minus 8 and bring down the plus 15 equals. Then on the other side of the equals, I multiply through and I get 3x plus 12. Now we have to get x by itself and isolate it. First, I notice I have like terms, so I combine those. Bring down the equal sign in a straight line if at all possible. Now notice that I have x terms on both sides of the equation. You want to try to get those on the same side. So I will subtract the 3x, in other words, move it over, and 4 minus 3 will give me 1x. But then to isolate that x, I would need to move that 7 over, which in essence subtracts it. So x is equal to 5. That would be my solution. When I come up here, I would choose answer choice A and type in the 5. Now in this equation, I need to get rid of the fractions. So I want to know what is my least common denominator for a 10, a 5, and a 3. At first you might think 10 would work, but 3 won't divide into 10. Some people may say 15 would work, but 10 won't divide into 15. Let's go ahead and maybe try 30. 30 would be a sufficiently large number so that we could cross cancel and divide. So when you cross cancel these, you divide. 10 divided into 30 is 3. So that will leave 3 with that x plus 1, which we're going to put in parentheses. Then divide with the next term. 30 divided by 5 would leave 6 with that 1. Plus 30 divided by 3 would leave 10 with that x minus 2. Now we will do like the last problem and distribute. 3 times x, 3 times 1 is 3x plus 3. 6 times 1 is just 6. 10 times x, 10 times negative 2 is positive 10x minus 20. Now notice 6 minus 20 would be negative 14. So I could combine the like terms. And again, I need to get my x terms on the same side. It may be easier just to subtract the 3x this time, moving that over, which would give me 3 equals negative 14 and a positive 7x. Now what should I do next? That's right. Move that 14 over, or add that 14, we say. And that will give me 17 equals 7x. The last step is always divide out the coefficient. So x is equal to 17 over 7. It's okay to get an answer that's a fraction. So I choose choice A and I type in 17 over 7. Now for this problem, before we solve it, we will use the least common denominator like previously, but notice there are x's in the denominator. We have to find out what the restrictions are. Restrictions are going to be what are the values that make that denominator 0. If you look at the first one, 4 minus 4 would give me 0. So I don't want to use a 4. 4 must be a restriction. If you look at the second one, fraction, negative 7 plus 7 would give me 0. I don't want that to happen. So there are 2 restrictions so far. Now when you look at this third one, it's a trinomial. It's kind of hard and difficult to tell what would give you 0. So go ahead and factor that. So factor that trinomial and we'll get x minus 4 and x plus 7, which if you did the FOIL method would indeed be that trinomial. These two are the same as choice 1 and 2 in the first 2 fractions. So I see that my restrictions would be positive 4 and negative 7. After you type in the restrictions, then you solve. We're going to use a common denominator of x minus 4 and x plus 7. We will use this around every value, every term, x minus 4, x plus 7, x minus 4, x plus 7. Now in the first fraction, the x minus 4 would cross cancel and divide out. That just leaves you that number 1 and the x plus 7. Then I have in the second fraction, the x plus 7 cancels out, and that leaves me a minus with that 5 and the x minus 4. In the last fraction, all of this cancels because remember the trinomial is the same thing as those 2 factors. So I'm only left with 11. Now I will multiply and distribute. I end up with 1x plus 7 minus 5x plus 20. Now if I combine like terms, I end up with negative 4x plus 27 equals 11. Now I must solve for x. If I move over the 27 and subtract it, then I have negative 4x equals negative 16. Then I will divide by negative 4. X is equal to 4. Well, it looks like that's a fine answer, but notice, whoa, that was one of my restrictions. If your answer is the same as a restriction, then omit and discard that answer. Go ahead and choose C, the solution set is empty. Now we're going to go ahead and get into some word problems. This problem is the choosing between 2 different plans. I have Club A that offers a membership for $13 plus $17 per month. I have Club B, which offers membership for $27 plus $15 per month. We're going to see what's what about these. It says, after how many months will the cost of the health clubs be the same? All right, if they're the same, then they're equal. And we want to know how many months. So the months will be the x. If we translate this into algebra, that would be 13 plus 17x, remember the month is the x, equals 27 plus 15x. Now we'll solve. If we subtract the 13 on both sides to solve, you get 17x equals 14 plus 15x. Now I must subtract the 15x to solve. I end up with 2x equals 14. Divide by 2 and x is equal to 7, and remember that stands for the months. Now there's an additional question. After you figure out the months, you want to go ahead and decide the total cost. Now the cost of each club is the same at 7 months, so you can go ahead and take that 7 and plug it into either club. For instance, if I choose Club A, it would have been $13 plus $17 per month for 7 months. This is easy to type into your calculator, so 17 times 7 and then plus that 13 would give you $132. Now here's another word problem that everybody needs to know because it deals with you, the consumer. Here we have a 70% off. It's a reduction. And you're going to purchase a new clothes dryer for $180. So that's a big discount. The question is, what is the original price of the clothes dryer? Well, if you look at our formula sheet that we used when solving these word problems, you can figure this out by taking 100% and subtracting the discount, the reduction. Then you will place the value X. X is going to be the original price, and that will equal to $180, which is the selling price or the new price. Now let's work it out. If a price was normally 100%, but you had a 70% reduction, you realize you only paid 30% of the price for that wonderful clothes dryer. Now let's change the percent to a decimal, 0.30, X equals 180, and we can quickly determine the cost if we divide by 0.30. So X, which is the original cost, would be $180 divided by 0.30, which is $600. You saved a lot of bucks on that purchase. Now here's another good consumer problem where you want to invest some money. You're going to take $21,000 and break it down into 2 different investments. A lot of financial experts tell you to diversify your investments. So one bank or some type of savings must be paying 8% and another is paying 9%, which are both great at this time. All right, if the total interest earned was $18.50, so if the interest is $18.50, how much did we put at each one of these rates? We'll refer back to your formula sheet for the word problem applications again. What we'll see is we have rate number 1, which is 8%, times X, which would be our first amount, plus rate number 2, which is 9%, times the total money, $21,000, minus X. That's the amount you put in the 8% account. And that's going to equal to the interest earned. Now let's go ahead and solve. Change these percents to decimals, and your equation will look like this, having the decimal representations. Then you will need to use a distributive property to multiply with that 0.09. So 21,000 times 0.09 is going to give me 1890, and 0.09 times that X looks like this. Now, when we combine our like terms with the X, that will give me a negative 0.01X plus 1890 equals 1850. To solve it, just subtract the 1890 on both sides. I have negative 0.01x equals negative 40. And now divide by that negative decimal number. So x will equal 4,000. Now the x was the amount that was paired with 8%. So that 4,000 will be the answer for the first account because the first account was 8%. To get the second amount at the second 9% account, take your total, 21,000, and subtract the 4,000. That will leave you with $17,000, which went into the second account at 9%. Now in this word problem, we are working with perimeter. So if you refer back to the formula sheet again and visualize a rectangle, the rectangle has a length and a width, and the perimeter formula is twice the width plus twice the length. Now let's see what's happening here at this playing field. It said the length is 5 yards longer than the width. So let's go ahead and call the width W, and the length would be W plus 5. Well, 3W plus 5 because it's triple the width. If the perimeter is 410 yards, what are the dimensions? Well, I have 410 for perimeter. Twice the width would be 2W, but twice the length, I'm going to have to use 3W plus 5 for the length. Now let's solve it. I get 410 equals 2W plus 6W when I distribute plus 10. Combining the like terms, I get 8W plus 10 over on the right, and I can subtract that 10. So 8W is equal to 400, and when I divide by 8, that tells me that the W, or the width, is going to be 50. Now the width is only one question, that's the 50, and we must get the length. Remember, length was 3W plus 5. So that's 3 times 50 plus 5. And when you calculate that, that's 155. Now in this question, you're going to be calculating a charge for a taxi cab. City cabs will charge a $2.50 pickup fee and $1.75 per mile. So their fee is 2.50, that's the fixed cost if you refer to the formula sheet, and $1.75 per mile, that's the variable cost, because the more miles you go, the higher that will be. Now Diego took this cab, and to go downtown his charge was $30.50, so his fee was $30.50. How far did he travel? So we're looking for the distance. The distance would be the miles, so we're going to go ahead and let miles be our unknown x. So let's go ahead and translate that into algebra, and it looks like this. When I solve, I subtract 250. That will give me 28 equals 1.75x. Divide by the 1.75. And if I do that, 28 divided by 1.75, I end up with 16. So he had to have traveled 16 miles. Now in this question, you don't actually get a number answer. You will be solving a formula for the specified variable. We want to solve for the n, so get n by itself. To get n by itself, we can simply divide by 4 pi. So n is equal to a divided by 4 pi. That's what you would type in. In this formula, we want to solve for n again. But notice I have a z that was added in. First, I'll need to subtract that z. So that will give me t subtract z equals nr. Now to get the n isolated, divide by the value r on both sides. So the n is equal to capital T minus capital Z divided by lowercase r. That's what you type in. Just a warning, if My Math Lab uses capital letters, you must use them too for those particular letters. Now here's an expression that would be complex numbers. The i's represent the imaginary unit. But the easy thing is we can simply combine like terms. If we combine the like terms, 7 plus 6 would be 13. Negative 9i plus 5i would be negative 4i. This would be the final answer because there are no longer any like terms. Now for here we have complex values again, but we're trying to find the product or multiply. To multiply these two, since they are binomials, we will use the FOIL method. First, outer, inner, last. So let's do this. Negative 3 times 7. Negative 3 times 7 is negative 21. Then we'll take, that's the first, my first term. Then we'll take the negative 3 times the I on the outer edges. So negative 3 times I would just be minus 3I. Now we'll go to the innermost terms. 5I times 7 is 35I. Since it's positive, I'll put a plus, and that's the innermost terms. Last but not least, I'll multiply the last terms. That would be 5I times I, which is 5I squared. And I'll again put a plus sign. Now, if you notice, we have like terms in the center, so combine those. That will give me 32I. Now, the I squared was given as a definition to always equal negative 1. So substitute in negative 1 in place of I squared and multiply. That will now give you a minus 5. Combine the negative 21 minus 5, and that would be negative 26 plus 32I. Be careful to always list the I term last. Now here we have a division problem, so we must use what's called the conjugate. The conjugate would be the identical two terms that are in the bottom except for the middle sign. So the proper way to simplify would take the conjugate, which is 9 plus I, and multiply that through in the numerator and denominator. When we multiply in the numerator, we will simply distribute. So I end up with 72 plus 8I. However, when we multiply in the denominator, you have to do the FOIL method. Because we are multiplying two conjugates, though, the outer and inner terms will always cancel out. So a shortcut would be just multiply the first two terms and then the last two terms. So 9 times 9 is 81, and negative I times positive I is negative I squared. Now remember, I squared is negative 1 itself, which gives us a double negative in the bottom, becomes positive, which would be 82 in the denominator. Now don't leave this as the final answer. We want A plus BI form. So take each term in the top, 72, put that over 82, then take that 8I, put that over 82, and let's go ahead and reduce. When I reduce the 72 over 82, you can simply divide each by 2. You will end up with 36 over 41. Then, when I reduce 8 over 82, again, just divide each by 2. That will give me 4I over 41. Or you could write the I separately to the right. That is the final answer. Here is another one like number 17. Let's use the conjugate. This time it's 1 minus I. When I distribute in the numerator, I get 4I minus 4I squared. In the denominator, remember it's the FOIL method, but outer and inner terms cancel. So simply multiply the first two terms to get 1, and the last two terms to get minus I squared. Everywhere there's an I squared, though, you must substitute that with a negative 1. So that means I have 4I minus 4 times negative 1 on top, and 1 minus negative 1 on bottom. In the numerator top, that would give me 4I plus 4. And in the denominator, the double negative becomes positive. That will give me 2. Again, don't leave this as the final answer. You must have it in A plus BI form. So we take 4I and place that over 2. Take the 4, place that over 2, and reduce. When we reduce, you get 2I plus 2, but you must reverse that to put it in the A plus BI form. Now we're almost done with Test 1 tutorial. Here we're revisiting what imaginary units would be. We know that the square root of 4 is 2, but because of the negative, that will be 2i. And we know that the square root of 64 is 8, but because of the negative, that will be 8i to indicate the negative radicand. Now if we simplify here, I now have 3 times 2i plus 2 times 8i, which will give me 6i plus 16i, which is 22i. That would be the final answer. Last problem of the day. Here we have the square root of 12, which is not a perfect square. But if you think about 12, 12 will factor as 2 times 6 and then 2 times 3. Or some people would prefer to think of it as 3 times 4, and that 4 is indeed our perfect square. So to simplify the square root of 12, the square root of 12 is normally written as 2 square root of 3 because of the square root 4 perfect square part. So if we were to simplify this, I would have negative 5 minus. I have 2 square root of 3 because of the 12, but since there was a negative radicand, I squeeze in an I. Then on the bottom, I have the 20. Now just like before, we will separate this larger fraction into 2 smaller ones in order to reduce. If I reduce the first part, that's negative 1/4. If I reduce the 2 and the 20, that's negative I square root of 3 over 10. Good luck with your Test 1 tutorial homework and with the test itself.